So let's talk about some definitions of trauma. Jamie Kerdane, who I mentioned, who trained me in the identity-oriented psychotrauma therapy, says that trauma is an unbearable reality, which is what the founder of Franz Rupert says about it. An unbearable reality, that the organism is powerless to do anything but dissociate. And when we talk about dissociation, that doesn't necessarily mean creating an alternate personality. It doesn't necessarily mean, diagnosable identity dissociative disorder or dissociative identity disorder. In more simple and common terms, it simply is the denial of the reality of what I'm feeling. I dissociate from my feelings. And Resmaa Menakem, who I mentioned, has defined trauma as too much, too fast, too soon. That's another way of saying an unbearable reality or a nervous system overwhelm. There's something or some things or a series of things that are too much for the nervous system to integrate. And therefore, there's some degree of denial of reality, and most often the denial of reality of my feelings. And the denial of my feelings is the denial of an important part of myself. Ultimately, it's self-denial. So we could say that trauma results in self-denial. Those feelings, those overwhelming feelings, get frozen in the body psyche and stored away for later metabolization. There we go again with the digestion, right? Later metabolization, either by one's own body psyche or passed down to future generations' body psyches, right? We pass these things down epigenetically. Franz Rupert, who is the German contemporary who created the identity-oriented psychotrauma therapy method that I mentioned, the IOPT, wrote an incredibly useful book for understanding the body psyche and trauma. It's called Trauma, Fear, and Love. And a few years ago, I wrote an article for Sensitivities magazine, which was a publication about essences. I'm going to pull up and share visually Franz Rupert's very useful description of what happens in the body psyche in trauma. And I find this structure very useful in Flower Essence Formulation. Trauma and psychological splits. I'll just go ahead and read along here. Trauma, according to Franz Rupert, is an event which causes the psyche to block unbearable reality from consciousness instead of maintaining connection to reality. The result is the division of the psyche into three parts that are evidenced in the phenomenon of the IOPT method. The traumatized parts, which are very young, often pre-verbal. The traumatized parts, the survival parts, and the healthy parts. The traumatized parts, which are very often pre-verbal and young, have remained frozen in time without resources. The surviving parts protect the person and his nervous system from the overwhelming memory of the traumatic experience and correspond with the personality in Dr. Bach's terms. The personality in Dr. Bach's terms, for those of you who are familiar with Dr. Bach's work, he created this idea of the 12 healers. This was the first 12 flower essences he's discovered, and that some people correspond with different zodiac signs, and that could be seen as the structure of our personality. So the way each person survives trauma in different ways is related to those personality types. And we could call those the survival strategies. And then the healthy parts are linked to a well-developed self, and in Dr. Bach's terms, the virtues that flower essence help to develop. So let's look at these in a little more detail. Here's this circular graph that could be very useful for our understanding. The healthy parts. So we have that green smiley face down at the bottom. The healthy parts of the psyche are related to well-being, the ability to easily manage the affairs of daily life, the ability to relax and enjoy oneself. No existential threat exists. One feels safe and comfortable in the environment and open to it. In this state, it is possible to develop and grow with ease. One is open to reality. So think here of the keywords integrity and integration. Other words related to healthy parts are accept, allow, rest, digest. The healthy parts of the self have the capacity to take in experiences from all the senses and metabolize them and integrate them into the whole of one's being. There is a capacity to be nourished by actual food as well as experiences. The healthy parts of the self also have a desire for wholeness, the desire to heal, the desire to integrate the parts of the self. The healthy parts have full actualized resources. The healthy parts do not need flower essences. They are the virtues inherent in each of us. And as we, excuse me, turning my page here. And as we take flower essences to catalyze healing, we are transforming the other parts, the survival strategies and trauma parts, into resourced healthy parts. So we can see taking flower essences as a way to resource ourselves. Next, we have the survival parts, survival strategies related to this gray, serious face. The survival parts are related to a state of stress, which is a reaction to possible threats. Psychophysical channels of perception and intellect are focused on the identification of the threat. Other functions of the organism, such as digestion and recovery, remain in the background or cease altogether. So there's a limited view of reality. The survival parts are very much about the individual's personality. One of my colleagues in Spain, an Argentine psychotherapist, Carolina Guzman, described trauma as a thing without its own structure, but that hangs itself on the structure of the personality. I found that very useful. Some would say that we structure our personality around our trauma. So again, if we think of Dr. Bach's idea of the 12 healers, or in more complex terms like the 12 zodiac signs, we can see how each personality survives trauma in its unique way. We can see the constitutional imbalances that trauma exaggerates, right? So if we have sensitivities already, let's say, for example, in my case, I have Neptune in my first house, which means that my organism is very sensitive and susceptible and can pick up on lots of things. Trauma is going to exacerbate that sensitivity. Another example, let's say someone who enjoys the virtue of cleanliness and organization, when it's imbalanced, might become obsessive, nitpicky, and intolerant as a way to manage reality or manage what they perceive as a threat. Someone who has a great capacity for empathy might defend themselves, might, turn it into a survival strategy with excessive introjection, loss of selfhood, and people-pleasing. Yet another person whose virtue it is to inspire ideas might get stuck in a constant state of battle against the man, exhausting their vitality. Any of these personalities could be sensitive types, and I've seen them individually and in combination as sensitive types. In all of these cases, I'm speaking in code for certain flower essences that could help catalyze shifts in the personalities to transform devitalizing imbalances into virtues and resources that are associated with the healthy parts. So finally, we have the traumatized parts, the red frowny face. The traumatized parts are related to a state of emergency in which the threat overwhelms stress responses and the situation becomes unbearable. Things feel hopeless and the person is powerless. Any stress response that might call the attention of the threat, such as crying, for example, is suppressed. Stress responses are frozen and reality is denied. So that means that the traumatized parts relate to feelings of being mute. They are feelings that are frozen beneath the surface. They are suppressed stress responses. They are, by definition, feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and powerlessness. So These are parts of the body psyche that each individual has in varying proportions. But let's remember that survival strategies are defenses that exist for a reason, to protect the organism from the overwhelming feelings of trauma that are locked away. When we give flower essences that break down our defenses, we can end up feeling defenseless when the trauma feelings are then allowed to come to the surface. So in trauma-informed flower essence formulation, we need to be thinking about the next parts, the traumatized parts, or the trauma feelings. In our work with flower essences, we're trying to strengthen the healthy parts, meaning to widen the organism's window of tolerance for reality. And we do that by resourcing the nervous system.